All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It's so nice to have everybody here. We're looking forward to our visit with Dr. Ray Dorsey. He's a co-author of two books that we're both all very interested in. The first one was this one. It came out in 2020, right during the pandemic, huh? Ending Parkinson's Disease: A Prescription for Action. And then this book just came out last month, The Parkinson's Plan: A Path to Prevention and Treatment. So we're going to go over I've come up with some questions for Dr. Dorsey out of the both books, and then we're going to open it up to open Q&A at the very end. So we're thankful that he was able to join us today. So looking at the first book, it's hard to believe this came out during the pandemic. I remember very vividly getting this book and was so excited to fill out my red card and send it to the White House. I was like, we're on the move. We're on the cusp of something big here.
So can I pick up on that?
Yeah, sure, please,
You sent
please
out
do.
a postcard that asked to ban chlorpyrifos. Chlorpyrifos has been banned, which is a pesticide widely used on apples, widely used on golf courses. Unfortunately, if the manufacturer is sued, so it's in courts, but that was banned. We asked for telemedicine coverage to be extended for Medicare beneficiaries. It's now extended through September of 2025. We asked for Paraquat to be banned, but that hasn't happened, and I think probably wanted more research funding still needs to be done. But 30,000 people, thank you for those that did. The more people make their voices heard, the more politicians respond. Politicians do not lead, generally speaking. They respond. They respond to the voices of their constituents. The more the Parkinson's community makes their voices heard, the more politicians will respond and take action on behalf of all of you.
How many cards do you know how many cards in total were sent to the White House?
30,000, 30,000.
30,000. Wow, that's a lot.
30,000 cards, postcards. We modeled it on the March of Dimes. Some of you are young enough to remember the March of Dimes began in 1938. 1938, March of Dimes begins. It floods the White House with dimes. 17 years later, Jonas Salk holds up a vaccine to prevent polio. We now live in a world largely free of polio. That was a gift from some of the people on this call right now. We can do exactly the same thing for Parkinson's disease in our generations. Wouldn't it be nice to say that 10 years from now, as we outline in the book, that the rise of Parkinson's has stopped, that Parkinson's is no longer rising, but that by 2036, Parkinson's disease is beginning to fall. These are things that are within our control. We can make our voices heard. We give you a plan to do this as individuals, as members of communities and members of countries, societies, to do that.
Agreed. Agreed. So just for a minute, just spend a few minutes on this book, some of the things that were in this book that I appreciated. But the book centered around a pact, and the pact stood for prevent, advocate, care, and treat. I was just curious, out of those four pillars, which one do you feel faces the biggest political and legislative resistance to
I think
policy
we
changes?
look. People get the idea we need better treatments for Parkinson's. The Michael J. Fox Foundation has been championing that. Pharmaceutical companies. There are lots of people who wake up every morning trying to develop better treatments for Parkinson's disease. There are people who think about providing better care for Parkinson's disease. But who wakes up every morning thinking about preventing Parkinson's disease? Who's waking up making sure that Roger's children, that Marcia's children, grandchildren do not get Parkinson's disease? And it's few. I wake up thinking about that, but there are really, really few people who do that. Who wakes up every morning thinking about preventing breast cancer? Who wakes up every morning thinking about preventing prostate cancer? If you step off an airplane in any major city, you'll see an ad for breast cancer treatments and cancer treatment centers all across the country. And we spend 1 out of every $5 in our economy on caring for people who are sick. But we only spend 2 cents out of every research dollar, Parkinson's research dollar, trying to prevent the disease. There are homes sold for more money in New York City and in South Florida and in Southern California every day for more money than we as a society invest in trying to prevent Parkinson's disease. If we don't go upstream and try to prevent people from becoming affected by the disease, we'll never get out of this mess.
Mm.
We'll never get out of this mess, right? We'll never train enough neurologists. We'll never have enough Parkinson's disease treatment centers, care centers. We'll never have effective enough treatments. The only way to get out of this mess is to prevent people from getting the disease in the first place. And that's what both books really lay out the case that Parkinson's is largely man-made disease, that it's chemicals in our food, water, and air for the vast majority of Americans affected by the disease. That's the cause, and that these are preventable, and that we
Hmm.
can create a world, a country, a society, a state, Florida, without Parkinson's disease.
Yeah, that would be certainly wonderful. In the first book, the work that you're doing affects all of the brain health community. Since the first book came out, have you seen any evidence that environmental and public health strategies that were proposed have gained any traction against other rapidly rising conditions like Alzheimer's or ALS?
Yeah, we're making progress. Look, trichloroethylene, where's my trichloroethylene?
Yes, you have your little diagram with the
My little
molecules.
molecule.
Here,
So
I
this is
like.
you little high school chemistry. So remember, everyone remembers water is made up of three atoms, H2O, two hydrogens and one oxygen. Trichloroethylene is made up of a whopping six, two carbons in black, a hydrogen in white, and three chlorine atoms in blue. Hence its name trichloroethylene. If you worked in the printing or publishing, if you worked in photography, if you worked as a mechanic, if you degreased any kind of metal, if you worked as an embalmer, if you worked in dry cleaning, what did you work as, Roger?
I worked in a factory where we used TCE to degrease metals that were stamped out on presses, and nobody told me to watch out for this stuff. I inhaled it. I got it on my skin for well over a year and a half.
So I'm on the crazy side, but I think TCE, as we indicate in our second book, it may be the most important cause of Parkinson's in the US. And not only is it associated with a 500% increased risk of Parkinson's, 500% increased risk of Parkinson's um, disease, but it causes cancer. So it's also linked to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, multiple myeloma, prostate cancer, renal cell carcinoma, and the list is long. It's the same chemical that was at the Marine Base Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, where Marines who served there had a 70% increased risk of developing Parkinson's. So these are Marines who were in their 20s. So the seeds of Parkinson's are planted early. They were average age were 20 and they were healthy, right? To be a Marine, you had to be pretty healthy. And they were only there for a short period of time, just over 2 years on average. Yet 34 years later, they had a 70% increased risk of developing Parkinson's because it was in their drinking water. It was in the water that they bathed with. It was the water that they cooked with. It was the water that they put their children in for baths. So the seeds of the disease are planted early. Same chemical is at Gowanus Canal here in Brooklyn. Same chemical at Toms River, New Jersey, if you read the book. Same chemical in Woburn, Massachusetts, if you read or saw the movie A Civil Action. So this
I just recently watched it.
did you watch Civil
Yeah, I just
Action?
recently watched it. It was a great movie.
Did you know it was trichloroethylene?
No, I didn't know that until I watched it. I was like, wow, look at that.
It's the same chemical. So I worry about, that movie depicts children dying of leukemia, much like Camp Lejeune started when a 6-year-old daughter of a Marine drill instructor, Jerry Insminger, developed and died from leukemia. I think the seeds of the disease, some diseases happen shortly after exposure, but some other diseases like Parkinson's, like Alzheimer's, have this decades or even generations later developing the disease. So I worry about Woburn, Massachusetts, are people developing Parkinson's disease there now.
Hmm. Now, in the first book, it called for a
Oh, and so
global.
the thing, we're making progress. So TC and PC were banned. In
Yes.
2024, the EPA banned trichloroethylene perchloroethylene. So this chemical, if the ban holds, and it looks like it's going to hold under the present administration,
Oh, good.
that future and over 10 years, the use of these chemicals will be phased out, and that future generations will not be working with these chemicals, and that will help prevent people from developing cancer. This is known to be a carcinogen according to the EPA, according to the World Health Organization, according to the Department of Health and Human Services. And it'll likely prevent Parkinson's disease. It doesn't do anything for the contaminated sites that are all around us in New York and in Florida, but it'll prevent future Rogers of the world from getting exposed to it as a function of their work. What a wonderful thing.
Mm. Yeah, that would be wonderful, wouldn't it? So I was saying that the first book called, for a global movement. So just curious, by what key metrics could you measure the success of the book 5 years later? Was it research funding, policy enactment, public awareness? What would you say has happened in the 5 years since this first wonderful book came out?
EPA bans chlorpyrifos, EPA bans trichloroethylene, EPA bans perchloroethylene. Telemedicine coverage is extended to Medicare beneficiaries at least through September 2025. The PD Avengers, a global grassroots organization, forms Larry Gifford, Sonia Mather, Tim Hague Sr., all three individuals with Parkinson's, all with relatively young ages of onset. They formed it. If you haven't joined the PD Avengers, please do so. It's open to anyone, anywhere. You don't have to have Parkinson's. Your children can join. They have over 9,000 members in over 100 different countries, including me. And you can join for 30 seconds. You just go to pdavengers.com. You can do that right now, pdavengers.com. We are making progress. We need to do more, and our book calls for even bolder action. Can we increase research funding 10x for Parkinson's disease? Can we increase the proportion that's going to preventing the disease from 2 cents out of every dollar to 2 dimes out of every dollar? There's lots and lots more that we can do, but we're making progress. And we will see the fruits of that labor. If we continue to progress, we can by 2035 say that Parkinson's is no longer the fastest growing brain disease. Its rise adjusted for age has halted, that there's a 0% rise, and that by 2036 we start talking about the fall of Parkinson's in the United States, and we start talking about the fall of Parkinson's disease worldwide.
Mm. So in the new book, it talks about the 0, 10, 100 goal. So the goal is by 2035, 0% rise in cases, tenfold increase in research prevention funding, and 100% access to levodopa. If you could only see one of those three things realized, what do you think would have the greatest impact on the Parkinson's community?
So Michael would say 100% access to levodopa. You got me. So listen, if you got a preventable disease, you got to prevent it. And you have the opportunity to prevent people from getting Parkinson's disease. How can you give that up? I'll give you an example. So one of my colleagues, for 10 years, I worked on a rare genetic disease called Huntington's disease. If you carry the genetic mutation, you develop the disease. If you didn't carry the genetic mutation, you didn't develop the disease. One of my colleagues, who's a neuroscientist, he carries the genetic mutation. So he knows that he will eventually develop Huntington's disease. But he took steps, some called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, selecting embryos from he and his wife that do not carry that genetic mutation, so that he knows that his 2 children will not develop Huntington's disease. And he comes from a relatively small family, so he's the last in his family to have the disease. So he says that when he dies, Huntington's disease in his family will die. Mm. That Huntington's disease will die in his generation. It will not be passed on to future individuals. I can't undo Parkinson's disease. I can't reverse Parkinson's disease. I probably can't cure Parkinson's disease, but I can make it so that Parkinson's disease ends in your generation. Mm-hmm. That Roger, Marcia, all your children and grandchildren, your spouses, your nephews, your nieces do not bear the burden of this disease. I can't think of a greater gift as a neurologist than give a world where the neurological disorder that you're charged for caring for just doesn't exist, or only exists in really small numbers. And I think we can get to the point where we prevent the vast majority of Parkinson's disease.
That would be wonderful. Now, in the new book, it talks about the learned pillar. The learned pillar calls for expanding and diversifying research. Where specifically do you see the most significant misdirection of research funds? And what relatively underfunded area holds the greatest promise of a true preventive drug?
So if you're diagnosed with a disease, you need to learn why you got it. So anytime a doctor tells you have a disease, high blood pressure, breast cancer, Parkinson's disease, sprained ankle, why did this happen to you? I'll give you 3. If you know why, you can prevent it, you can slow it, you can treat it, and you can possibly cure it. I can't think of really any major medical conditions that we can cure. Everyone wants to cure for Parkinson's disease where we don't know what its cause is. And when we figured out what the cause of polio was, it wasn't clear that was viruses early on. We prevented it. When we figured out the cause of hepatitis C, it used to be called non-Hep A, non-Hep B, we can now cure it. And when we figured out the cause of stomach ulcers, we cured it. So the first step is to learn why people have the disease. So there was a great study done by the Parkinson's Foundation called PD Generation. Some of you probably participated in the study.
Yeah.
It offers free genetic testing and genetic counseling to anyone with Parkinson's in the United States and several other countries around the world. And they looked at the results for the first 8,000 individuals. And of the 8,000, 13% carry a genetic cause or genetic risk factor for the disease. So another way, 87% of Americans with Parkinson's, the vast majority of Americans with Parkinson's, have no known genetic cause or genetic risk factor for the disease. The principal cause for the vast majority of Americans with Parkinson's lies not within us, but outside of us in our environment. Yet we fund there are 6 times as many publications on the genetics of Parkinson's disease than there are on the environment. This chemical, which I think might be the most important cause of Parkinson's, I might be wrong. This chemical, along with perchloroethylene, there are 45 total publications in the world's literature over the last 60 years. We're missing the boat. If the vast majority of Americans with Parkinson's and the vast majority of humans and large portions of the world, the same study's been done in Europe and the Middle East, North and South America, suggesting 13 to 15% of people carry a genetic risk factor, do not carry a genetic risk factor. We need to find out what these environmental causes are so we can get rid of them.
Mm. Yeah, something that was impressed me, got me in the book was it talked about the example of identical twins that were both exposed to the same amounts of paraquat, and one developed cancer and one developed Parkinson's. It's the etymology of the disease is quite odd, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's listen, there are lots of things we don't know. So not everyone exposed to paraquat and everyone exposed to this chemical, not everyone working with you developed Parkinson's. Some of them developed nothing. Some of them got cancer. Some might have gotten skin conditions. Only 10% of smokers get lung cancer. Doesn't mean distract from the fact that smoking causes lung cancer. If smoking increases your risk of lung cancer 30-fold increase. Even today, 80 to 90% of lung cancer is due to smoking. In the early 1900s, in the United States, there just was not lung cancer. Lung cancer was so rare, it was considered a once-in-a-lifetime oddity. Doctors and students would gather around seeing a case of lung cancer, think they would never see it again. It wasn't until the advent of cigarettes in the early 1900s that we saw a corresponding rise in lung cancer 25 years later. Today, lung cancer is the leading cause of cancer death in the United States, leading cause of cancer death in the world, and it need not be. If we get rid of smoking, we get rid of the vast majority of lung cancer. If we get rid of certain pesticides, if we get rid of certain dry cleaning and degreasing chemicals, if we get rid of outdoor and indoor air pollution, we get rid of the vast majority of Parkinson's, and it becomes a very, very rare disease, and people are spared its terrible consequences. And if you already have the disease, which many people in this have, they're passionate about preventing it for their kids and grandkids and their spouses and their nephews and nieces and their friends and family, it's likely that if you start getting exposed to this chemical, you have a much higher likelihood of having a slower rate of progression of the disease. So if you want to slow your rate of progression of Parkinson's disease, one, stop getting exposed to these chemicals. Stop spraying certain pesticides in your home or on your grass. Roll up your windows when you're in traffic. Get an air purifier. Get a water purifier. Buy organic produce. Wash your produce so that you get fewer lower levels of exposure. We give you 25 recommendations in the book, the Parkinson's Plan, beginning on page 237. Michael and I got tired of asking you, all of you asked me questions on how can I slow the rate of progression. So we give you 25 recommendations to possibly slow the rate of progression. I'll just read a couple. Can I read a couple, Roger?
Yeah, please do. That's one of the areas I wanted to touch on was the Parkinson's 25. What are the top 5 out of the 25?
Oh my gosh, top
I know
5.
I'm putting you on the spot there.
Well, wow. Wow. I'll read a couple. Wash your produce, even the organic ones. Pesticides have contaminated our food supply. Remnants of pesticides are found in 20% of common foods. So 20% of the food you're eating has pesticides on it. Organic produce, dairy products, and meat can reduce exposure, but can still have unsafe residues of pesticides. So I buy organic, and then I wash my produce at least with water and consider simple vegetable washes vinegar, or salt solutions too. Another one, well, combined. If so, 1 in 8 Americans, anyone get their water from a well? Anyone get their water from a well? So if you get your water from a well, have your well tested. And it turns out wells are not regulated by the Safe Drinking Water Act in the United States, tend to be in rural areas and tend to be prone to be contaminated by pesticide runoff from nearby farms. So there are lots and lots of studies that suggest that well water exposures increase risk for Parkinson's disease. If people have exposure to wells, especially as a kid, let me know. Number 9, use a water filter. A simple carbon water filter, widely available in supermarkets, you can get it right now, can reduce exposures to pesticides, trichloroethylene, and other chemicals that may be in your water. These carbon filters can be installed for the home house at the point of entry or the point of use, such as faucets or even a water pitcher. So I have a big water tank. I just fill it, it holds probably a gallon of water. I fill it basically every day or two, and it has to go through a carbon filter, and I drink cleaner water. Consider an air purifier. This is especially important. Air pollution is increasingly linked to Parkinson's and really increasingly linked to dementia, especially Alzheimer's. Air purifiers are an easy and effective way to lower your risk of disease from indoor air pollution. Air purifiers do range in cost from as low as $10 to as high as $1,000, require periodic cleaning and filter changes, and may need to be installed in multiple places depending on the size of the home, school, or workplace. Be sure to use air purifiers with carbon filters designed to remove volatile organic chemicals like TCE. And then, oh my gosh, there's so many. Don't poison yourself. This gets me crazy. Sometimes the remedy is worse than the disease. Insects, including fleas, ants, and moths, can be unwanted guests. Unfortunately, some common pesticides can increase the risk of Parkinson's. For example, the pesticide permethrin found in flea collars, ant sprays, mothballs, and outdoor apparel can reduce dopamine-producing nerve cells in laboratory animals. Consider safer alternatives and, if necessary, minimize exposure by wearing a mask, increasing ventilation, and avoiding spraying near children.
Mm.
I'll just point out the seeds of Parkinson's are planted early. If you don't want your grandchildren or children to get it, ensure their environment is safe. Roger, how old were you when you worked in this plant?
I was 20,
And then how old were you when you were diagnosed?
57.
Yeah, so you read the textbook. So Camp Lejeune was a 34-year lag. They were 20. On average, 34 years later, they were developed Parkinson's. I mean, right? I didn't know your story. I mean, that's it. And so I worry about exposure as kids, and I worry about like what were you doing as a teenager or young adult. And 20, like the standard deviation in the study, I would think was 2 years. So there were teenagers at Camp Lejeune who were exposed to trichloroethylene in their drinking water, in the water that they were bathing in the water that they were cleaning in, cooking in, and 34 years later, with a wide range of variability, developed Parkinson's disease. And we just give you story after story of, Roger, if I knew your story, we'd put you in the book, of people who do it. And it's just not necessary. There are companies advertise safer decreasing alternatives. This was developed in the 1860s when Abraham Lincoln was president.
Wow.
It's been used for a century. This chemical's been used commercially for a century. I think we can come up, engineers have come up with safer cars and safer airplanes since the days of Orville Wilbur Wright and Henry Ford. We can come up with safer degreasing chemicals.
Yeah, and that's interestingly, like as the book points out, TCE is banned in a lot of other countries besides the United States.
And look, we are seeing the signs that if you clean up your environment, that Parkinson's could fall. In Rotterdam, in the Netherlands, they did a study looking at the incidence, the number of new cases of Parkinson's adjusted for age between 1990 and 2011, a 21-year period. And the incidence, according to the study, the incidence fell by 60%. 60%. And the authors couldn't explain why. I went back, not the way you want to do research, you want to look forward, but I went back and they had banned TCE. TCE levels were the lowest in all of Europe in 1981. They were among the first countries to ban paraquat. Levels of fat-soluble, fat-loving pesticides in fat had dropped between 75 and 90%, and air quality improved between 50 and 90%. In Germany, the incidence of Parkinson's disease is falling.
Mm.
In Europe, the rates of Parkinson's, prevalence of Parkinson's adjusted for age is the slowest growing of any place in the world. There are signs that in countries like Europe, which historically were the first to report Parkinson's disease and among the countries with the highest rates, that it has peaked because they're cleaning up their environment and Parkinson's is starting to fall. We can do the same thing in the United States. We can do the same thing in Canada. We can do the same thing around the world and have fewer people be affected with this terrible disease.
That leads me to my next question. So the plan stands for prevent, learn, amplify, and navigate, right?
Yes.
So, but the amplify part, can you think of any specific patient advocacy that you've witnessed that has most effectively catalyzed the change? Like, I know the first book talked about the ACT UP organization for AIDS and also the MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Do we have a corresponding organization or some organization that's out in the front of the public in the United States when it comes to that?
So Michael J. Fox, the Parkinson's Foundation, they do, but they're like professional organizations. They aren't the people who change diseases aren't professional organizations.
Grassroots.
They aren't neurologists. They are people who are most directly affected by the disease. Who got most pissed off about their kids dying? Moms. And they did this knowing, right, obviously, that their kids weren't coming back from the dead, right? They did this after their children were hurt. It's like the Sandy Hook parents today. They're doing it so that our kids don't get shot at their school. MAD did it so that our kids don't get killed by drunk drivers. And today, because of MAD, every year since MAD was formed in 1980 and 1988, drinking driving is illegal in all 50 states. Blood alcohol levels dropped to 0.08. Drinking age is raised to 21. Drinking and driving is socially unacceptable. 10,000 fewer people per year since 1988 die in car accidents from drinking and driving. That's 10,000 fewer kids, 10,000 fewer families, 10,000 fewer schools, 10,000 fewer communities not torn apart by preventable action. And today, drinking and driving is socially unacceptable, and it's not only socially unacceptable in the United States, it's socially unacceptable around the world. We can do the same thing for Parkinson's disease. And quite frankly, I think we have a duty and responsibility to do so. We've received this gift of a world largely free of polio. Some of you participated in MAD, so thank you. We've received a world where drinking and driving is socially unacceptable. We've received a world because of HIV activists here in New York City, where HIV is preventable with a condom and treatable and associated with a near normal life expectancy. These are gifts we've received from previous generations. We have an obligation to receive those gifts, and we have an obligation to reciprocate. And I think the way we can reciprocate is by giving our kids and future generations a world without Parkinson's.
Do you see the PD Avengers being that grassroots organization?
I think they are, and they need more members. You know, there are 1.2 million Americans with Parkinson's disease. There are nearly 12 million people with Parkinson's around the world. They have 9,000 members. Why don't they have 100,000 members?
I
right?
agree.
But people can join right now. 30 seconds to do so. If you can't, you can go to our website, pdplan.org. We have a little link for a call to action and sign up for the PD Avengers. I think we've signed up. I think Larry Gifford told me that they've had probably nearly 1,000 new members just since the book came out a couple months ago. So this can change it, and politicians will respond. They will respond if we make our voices heard, but they will not respond if we're silent. So.
Yeah, exactly right. And one of our local organizations, the Neuro Challenge Foundation, hopes to play a part in that as well. As our CEO is on the call today, so I just wanted to mention that while she's here. The third pillar we talked about in the book is, or the last pillar is navigate. So it's just out of curiosity, if you were newly diagnosed, what is the single most exciting non-dopaminergic therapy or innovation on the horizon that would give you the most hope?
So if you're diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, the first thing you need to do is figure out why you got the disease and stop being exposed to these chemicals. So I'll give you an example. If you're a smoker, you get diagnosed with lung cancer, what's the first thing the doctor's going to tell you to do?
Mm-hmm.
But you know, Roger, you could have been diagnosed with Parkinson's and you could have still been working at that plant.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could be a farmer and still being exposed to the pesticides that are linked to disease. Or you could still be drinking well water. Or you could still be living near a contaminated site or a dry cleaner. And so there are things that you can do, and we give you 25 very tangible, concrete recommendations to reduce exposure. Second thing, people are always looking for disease modifying treatment. I think the disease modifying treatment, or one, avoiding exposure, and the second is exercise. So the amount of evidence linking the benefits of exercise to Parkinson's is just astronomical. People need to sweat. I tell my patients at least an hour a day, and if I had Parkinson's, I would be exercising 2 hours a day, and
I
nothing
heard that.
besides my family would get between me and exercise. It would just be like brushing my teeth. It's just something I'm going to do every day. Especially, you're young, right? You want to live a long, productive life, and exercise is your gateway to doing that. So avoid ongoing exposures and exercise. Now, Michael Oken, the Parkinson Specialist, University of Florida, chapters 8 and 9 outlines what are the most promising new treatments for Parkinson's in the near term, next 5 years, the midterm, 5 to 10 years, and the long term beyond 10 years. So we give you what are the promising treatments as well.
Mm.
I think levodopa pumps, I think things that antibodies to prevent the spread of the misfolded protein, nanotechnologies in the longer term. I think all those things are promise.
Yeah, what part do you see artificial intelligence? I mean, I was very fascinated to read about the AlphaFold 3 that came up from the Google DeepMind group, and the proteins were all mapped out, and all of the proteins were mapped out in a short period of time, including alpha-synuclein. What part do you see artificial intelligence playing in helping us find a way to prevent or treat Parkinson's?
I think it's going to be helpful for coming up, accelerating the development of new treatments. I think that's likely. I think it's going to accelerate our ability to diagnose individuals. So we and others have done studies with smartphones and wearable sensors to help identify people with the disease. And you can now measure your disease progression and see, what portion of the day you have tremor and what portion of the day you don't have tremor. I think that's really powerful. Michael who's a world's expert in deep brain stimulation, talks about adaptive deep brain stimulation. Right now, your settings are fixed. You set your deep brain stimulator, and that determines the parameters of your setting. Right now, that you can have electrodes that are in the brain that are providing the stimulation. They could also, in addition to delivering stimulation, can be sensing. And so they can give information back to the thing about what the activity that's going on in the brain. I think we're missing the opportunities for deep brain stimulation and others to adapt settings based on our activity or our gait speed. So if you have an off period and you start walking slower, shouldn't you be able to increase the amount of stimulation you have? If you're doing better, can you just maintain it? Can it learn, for example, what settings work the best for you rather than going to the doctor's office every 3 months and going through a series of tests? Can levodopa pumps, these subcutaneous pumps that are coming out, can they sense people's activity or their amount of tremor, for example, and titrate up or down the amount of medication based on tremor or dyskinesias? I think we need to push the envelope a little bit more here. We're going to need to invest more money in it. We, as a society, only last year, $250 million for Parkinson's disease research from NIH. HIV, which affects the same number of Americans, about 1.2 million Americans, gets $3 billion a year. And we've seen what a dramatic change in society that money has had. The incidence of HIV is at its lowest level since 1990. It is likely that there are people listening to this call who do not have HIV, because of research funding and because of activism. And what a wonderful thing to not be taking antiretroviral therapies. What a wonderful thing to not be worried about passing on the virus to others. We can do the same thing for Parkinson's, and that's why we put together a plan for actions that you can take as individuals in your communities, get rid of pesticides on your kids' playgrounds and schools, and societies ban paraquat to change the course of this disease.
Mm. Well, speaking about technology, so one of the apps that I encourage my group to use is in the Apple Watch, the Strive PD app, because it keeps track of all that stuff. And then when I go see my movement disorder specialist, she can download it all, which leads me to another question. So I've benefited from having a local MDS, fortunately, but I also augmented that with care through an organization called Synaptic Care. So that organization, I got a speech therapist, I got a physical therapist, I got an occupational therapist, I got a psychiatrist, I got an MDS, all under one umbrella. And they all talk to each other, and a care coordinator. And if I lost that, I would be really upset. And I know many of our groups here live in isolated places, That's the only way they can get to see an MDS. So if Medicare cuts off that access in September, what will these people do?
Listen, we got to make our voices heard, right? You've been paying into Medicare. Some of people on this thing have been paying in since its inception in 1965. The purpose of Medicare, the reason we created Medicare was to guarantee access to healthcare when half of older Americans did not have it. In 1965, half of older Americans didn't have access to healthcare. The purpose of Medicare is to guarantee access to care. And that care should come to you instead of you going to the care. Who came up with this crazy model that people with Parkinson's, with impaired driving ability and overburdened caregivers should drive to urban settings to sit in waiting rooms to be seen for 15 minutes? That care model has some deep flaws in it. We should bring care to patients on their terms. Full disclosure, I have a small, tiny interest in Synaptic Cure, which is a fantastic thing started by people with ALS because they same thing. And by the way, I think a lot of ALS may be preventable. That's what we're thinking about for our next book is what are the other brain diseases? If Parkinson's disease is largely preventable, then what other brain diseases from autism to ALS to Alzheimer's might be preventable too? So I think there's a lot more to be done, and we need to make care accessible. Politicians will respond. Listen, there's a midterm election coming up. If people say if 1.2 million Americans with Parkinson's disease, if 10,000 Americans turn 65 every day, if they make their voices heard and say that we want Medicare's coverage of telemedicine into the home to be permanent, it'll become permanent.
Good point. It makes me think of a question because you're talking about all these different brain diseases, ALS, Parkinson's, I'm having a PSP, MDA, all those different diseases. MSA, I'm sorry, MSA. I've heard it said before, and I don't know if it was in the book I read it or it was a webinar I went to, but they said, a breakthrough in one of those diseases could correlate to the other diseases. How do you see that?
I think yes. I think they're all recent diseases. So if you read the Bible, you can read about seizures and strokes and migraines. St. Paul, from a neurologist standpoint, St. Paul going on the road to Damascus, struck down by blinding light, hearing the voice of God. That sounds a lot like a seizure. And so there are descriptions of seizures, strokes, and migraines that go back centuries, if not millennia. Parkinson's disease, the first major description is 1817. ALS is not described till 1869. Multiple systems atrophy not described till 1950s. PSP is not described till 1963 or 66. Dementia with Lewy bodies is not described until 1976 by a Japanese psychiatrist, Dr. Kenji Kosaka, who in 1984 asked, "Is this a new disease?" ? I think many of these diseases, the most principal causes of them are tied to the Industrial Revolution, tied to chemicals that have gotten into our food, water, and air. If we get these chemicals out of our food, water, and air, we create worlds without these diseases, and that's what gets me most excited. There is no reason why people should be suffering. The vast majority of people with these conditions should be suffering with these diseases.
I agree. Well, I just have a couple more questions for you before I open it up for open Q&A. In the book, it talked about the care partner plan. The book's focus is on the patient, but care partners we know are essential. What is the single most crucial piece of advice that you have for a care partner to manage not only their own health and not burn out, but also maintain the health of their partner?
So Michael has this beautiful analogy, I think, in chapter 7 of the book called The Parkinson's Universe. And it says that all care should resolve around the sun, and the sun is the patient. And then he sends the analogy and he says the planet that's closest to the sun is the caregiver, and that's Mercury, and it gets hot. It's really, really, really hard to be a caregiver. And I think looking back, I think we need to pay more attention to the needs of caregivers. We know the simple act of caregiving increases the risk of mortality and increases stress and strain on them. If you have Parkinson's and you have a dedicated caregiver, make sure your caregiver gets a break from you. The respite care isn't for you, the individual with the disease. It's a gift to your caregiver so they get a break from the job. It is really, 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 really difficult to care for someone with Parkinson's disease. And if you think about it, it's like the opposite of caring for a kid. As a kid ages, their needs decrease. With Parkinson's disease, as someone progresses the disease, the needs increase, and the ability of the caregiver to meet those needs decreases because they're not getting any younger either. So we need to think uh, about means of supporting the caregiver. And I think individuals with the disease need to think, what can I do? How can I structure my life, especially if I have resources to reduce the burden on my caregiver? Of course, we want our spouse, for example, to care for us. I mean, who's better than our spouse to care for us? But it can't be 24/7. It needs to have a break. That spouse needs to go disappear for periods of time and live their own life. And then when they're caregiving, they can be better at doing so. It's a brutal job. One person told me there's no way to spend your golden years. And I want people to spend their golden years without Parkinson's disease, and I want them to spend their golden years without having to care for someone with Parkinson's disease.
Hmm. All right, one more question for me is so since both these books have come out 5 years ago, how has that affected the way that you as a doctor treat your patients that you deal with who have Parkinson's disease? How's that affected your whole way of dealing with persons that are diagnosed with Parkinson's or treating Parkinson's?
Yeah, so one of the first questions I ask when I meet with someone with Parkinson's disease is, do you know how you got the disease?
Hmm.
And look, I didn't know, right? You just told me about the decreasing. I didn't know that, right? And you probably do. How'd you figure that out?
I think it was after reading the first book, and you and I actually connected a little bit on a webinar with the PD Avengers, and you actually pointed me to the Superfund site in Connecticut, where the company I worked for had the company to take all their stuff away and put it on the ground, and the barrels all rotted, and all the TC just went right into the groundwater.
Yeah, and so I spend 5 or 10 minutes trying to figure out when I see a patient with Parkinson's disease why they have the disease. And that's how I learn, and I think that's actions that it's very actionable, right? If you're still getting exposed to the chemical, what better thing to do than to stop it? And the book is filled with stories. So we give you all the evidence. If you're a there's scientists, you like the science. We have 60 pages of references. I think there's about 1,000 references, so you can knock yourself out. But most of us don't like reading study A, study B, study C. So we give you the stories of a brother and sister who worked in a family dry cleaning business, and both of them developed Parkinson's disease. We give you stories of people who worked with these degreasing chemicals. We give the story of Air Force veterans who were exposed to these chemicals as a price of their service. So the book is we give you all the stories. And so I spend my time thinking about why people get the disease. And then we're a researcher, you got your blinders on. And so you just keep reading it. And as I keep reading it, I keep seeing other diseases. I see cancer, I see autism, I see ALS, I see dementia. And I think we want to broaden our thing and think about preventing brain diseases. Today, brain diseases are the world's leading source of disability. More disability globally from brain diseases than from heart disease or from cancer. It's never been like that. That is not natural. That is unnatural. And I think we can take actions as individuals, communities, and societies to stop it. And
Hmm.
what a wonderful thing to have a world where 1 in 3 85-year-olds don't get Alzheimer's disease, where 1 in 31 8-year-olds don't have autism, where Parkinson's disease is no longer the world's fastest growing brain disease, where the incidence of ALS and Alzheimer's and brain cancer are no longer rising. These are things we can create. I know everyone's a little bit worried about destruction going on in society. Why don't we build something in society? Why don't we build something? Why don't we build something, a world without Parkinson's disease, a world where 1 in 31 children don't get Alzheimer's disease, where 1 in 3 85-year-olds don't get Alzheimer's disease. We can do that. We can take actions right now to change the course of those diseases. And we should be doing so. We should be doing so with urgency, because the longer we wait, the more people we find it is acceptable to get autism, ALS, brain cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and Parkinson's disease. I don't find it acceptable. And I want everyone else to join in, make their voices heard, and build a world without Parkinson's disease.
I agree. That's a great thought to that. All right, so I have some questions from our audience before I open up for open Q&A. So one of our members, because we live here in Florida, and you've probably heard of red tide. It's a offshoot. Of course, they don't come out and say it, but it has to do with all the fertilizers that are used in Lake Okeechobee and causes these massive algae blooms get off the coast, and then it gets in
Oh,
the air and it gets in your lungs and it irritates your lungs. Should we, as people with Parkinson's disease, worry about being exposed to red tide?
Yeah, so this is really we might be missing the boat here. So in the book, we talk about a story in Guam where during World War II, I think 6 hours after the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor, they wanted to get control of the Pacific Islands to get control of rubber for their military uses. They take over the U.S. Controlled island of Guam, and the indigenous population, the Chamorro, go into the woods, into the forest, and subsist on seeds called cycad seeds. Those cycad seeds have a mitochondrial toxin called BMAA that likely produced ALS in individuals with exposed to this seed. Normally, under normal circumstances, they would wash and carefully prepare it. My favorite little story is they would wash it and they would feed the wash water to a chicken. And if the chicken died, they knew they needed to wash it some more.
I remember that.
But when you're on the run, you don't have time to carefully prepare your seeds. So you're eating the seeds raw or with little preparation. About 8 years afterwards, they were developing ALS. We'll call that 5 years ALS. 15 years later, would develop Parkinson's, and 25 years would develop Alzheimer's disease. Some individuals, if they lived long enough, would develop all three. Some would develop one or the other. That BMAA is produced by algae on the roots of that plant. That mitochondrial toxin, which people were ingesting, is produced by algae on the roots of that plant. That same algae is in some of these algae blooms. Now, I am not the world's expert on the algae blooms, but I get really concerned that these same algae found on this plant, BMAA, that linked to ALS, linked to Parkinson's, linked to dementia, that these algae blooms are also likely contributing to it. And there have been studies looking at high rates of ALS, for example, which has the shortest lag period, that's the easiest to study, linking these algae blooms to ALS. I haven't seen such studies for Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, but I would not be hanging out near algae blooms.
Yeah, good idea. All right, one of our members, Daryl, asked a question in the chat. He said, "How do we drive efforts for prevention and cure versus treatment? There is little or no profit incentive to develop or cure prevention because you eliminate your repeat customers. The focus has to be set on a high-level economic view, completely separated from profit incentives." What is your view on the perspective?
I think he's exactly right. Let me tell you what the economic benefit of preventing 1%, let's just say Ray's off his rocker, and it's only 1% of Parkinson's disease is preventable. If we prevented 1% of Parkinson's disease, that would save a society, U.S. society, $500 million per year.
Wow.
$500 million per year. Give you a flavor. NIH funding is last year was $250 million. Michael J. Fox Foundation funding about $300 million. And paraquat global sales, according to The Guardian, is $400 million. The U.S. would be better off as a society is writing a check to the paraquat manufacturers to stop having them sell paraquat, not profits, just sales of paraquat, because we could prevent 1% of Parkinson's disease. And half that $500 million would be to Medicare, $250 million. Each person with Parkinson's disease, the economic burden is $50,000, half to Medicare, half from disability, caregiver support, co-pays, and the like. So the economic benefits are enormous. If we care about Medicare, if we care about Medicaid, if we want to spend less on healthcare and more on education, more on the arts, more on the military, I don't care, then we can do this by just simply preventing diseases. 1%, $500 million per year. So when I wake up and I'm not so sure about if I'm investing my time in a wise place, I think, $500 million per year is pretty good. And if you're, those finance people, that's an annuity. And so that's, maybe $10 billion or something, $8 billion. That's pretty good. Just 1%.
That would be nice. One other question was somebody asked about what do you recommend for pest control? It's down here in Florida, where there's a subtropical environment. What would you recommend for pest control?
So one, I'm a neurologist, not a toxicologist, and I'm getting into all this stuff like, I get dry cleaning recommendations and things. So I am not certain, but there's a group of women in West Palm Beach called the Songbirds who are deeply concerned about where all the songbirds going because they've disappeared. and they were in West Palm Beach, not short on resources. Every Monday, trucks come in spraying pesticides on all the hedges and grounds. So one, do you need to have it sprayed? Second, if you do need it sprayed, can you ask them to use pesticides that are less toxic? Third, can you get out of town when they're done and do not have your kids like be there? Fourth, can you open your windows and ventilate the house after they're spraying? So then I think there are lots and lots of very tangible things. Sometimes there are pesticide-free solutions. Listen, synthetic pesticides weren't created until World War II, and with good purpose. They prevented lots of people from getting malaria. But the rest of this, there are alternative solutions. Humanity's been around for about 200,000 years, and for most of the time, we didn't have synthetic pesticides. Rachel Carson wasn't even against pesticides. She was against the indiscriminate use of pesticides. So if you need to use pesticides, you need to use pesticides. Even I occasionally have used pesticides, but I avoid them like the plague, and I wouldn't be spraying chemicals needlessly on my lawn.
I agree. I agree. Well, I'm going to open it up for question and answer now. So the first hand I see is Ed or Doe Fernandez. Go ahead. I unmuted you.
Oh, thank you, Roger, and thank you, Dr. Dorsey, for your talk. We appreciate you. Uh, my question has to do with detrimental externalities. Like my wife lived and worked around the Love Canal in New York for 10, 15 years. And I did a research paper in college about detrimental externalities based on that Love Canal story. Now, last week I saw one of the ads that were saying that if you believe that you got Parkinson's or any other disease from using paraquat and this and that the other thing, that there's a class action suit going on, and just take action. So I took action, and it was spam. They started sending me all these emails, but yesterday in the mail, this company called Crawl Settlement Administration LLC sent me a little card and asking me for more information, and it's a class member ID, blah blah blah. So I was wondering, because it would be very hard for us to prove that my wife got Parkinson's because of her proximity to the Love Canal and maybe drinking water or just hanging around that area. So what would you say? What would you suggest to do?
So, Love Canal, for those who don't know, is the first federally designated Superfund site. 1970s, President Carter had ordered the evacuation of the town because it was contaminated with trichloroethylene and a bunch of other chemicals. They had built a canal that a chemical company had dumped their waste in, and some of it bubbled up in people's backyards and into their basements and the like. There are attorneys who are representing, for example, the victims of Camp Lejeune. And there are other attorneys increasingly aware of this. To me, when you see the fact that the law that suing is your alternative speaks to the fact that we as a society have not protected the public. So the fact that you have to go to the courts to seek recourse for this is a sign that we as a society have not taken actions to sufficiently protect civilians, or quite frankly, to protect veterans. Dr. Sarah Whittingham, who's one of the protagonists in the book, likely got her Parkinson's as due to exposure to the same chemical, degreasing engines as part of the Iraq and wars in the Middle East. So there are attorneys out there that are providing counseling into that. We've educated some attorneys about the effects of Parkinson's and ALS, about TCE and Parkinson's disease. If you have questions, you can email me info@pdplan.org. That's it. I'm not an expert. I don't do any testifying or anything along those lines.
Okay. Thank you for answering that, Dr. Dorsey.
Thank you
Rich
very much.
Cada. Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dorsey. So the action I've taken, along with Samantha York, who is logged on here, maybe possibly Roger, you can unmute her, but we've started our own nonprofit. It's called Act for Parkinson's, and yeah, thank you. We were, trying to raise some money, and I was hoping, and that you could maybe send a copy or two of your book that's signed. We're happy to pay for the books. We're happy to pay for the freight, whatever. But anyway, because we'd like to put those up for auction at our upcoming events to raise funds for Parkinson's research and outreach.
Yeah, so listen, fantastic. Thank you. If you want to, there are things that we can do to help do that, send you copies of signed books. Just email me at info@pdplan.org. Everyone calls me Ray. Ray, thanks for your efforts. Can you send us a couple signed books to 123 Main Street? And we'll send those out. It might take us a little bit of time, but we'll be more than happy to do that. Anything that we can do to serve our common goal of preventing the disease, learning why people are affected, amplifying your voices, and navigating new frontiers of treatments, Michael and I are happy to do. And we need more and more voices and more organizations to do it because the status quo is not working. The
Yes.
status quo is not working. If it were working, Michael and I wouldn't have written the book. We wouldn't have written a plan to end it. So just info@pdplan.org. Just say, can you send us a couple signed books for our fundraiser?
We'll get that off to you. One of the key goals of this is, if you go to Google, for example, and type in Parkinson's disease, you will get, 10 million answers or places to go look for that. So one of our key goals is to simplify the what's needed for people to find the information they're looking for, because it's very, very challenging for people, and it's challenging for us to figure out how to do this. But that's our goal, is we're going to try to figure out how to simplify it, make it easier for people with Parkinson's and their caregivers to find answers.
Can I share something real quick, Roger?
Thanks, Rich. Go ahead, Ray.
Can you let me share my screen, Roger?
Sure. Let me make you a co-host. There you go.
Thank you. So this is our website. It's pdplan.org. It's really, 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 really easy. You can order the book. If you have like a group and you want to order bulk orders, you just come over here and you go to bulk orders, and you can get discounts for like 40% off through different bulk orders. Porch Light and Book Pal, you can see, substantial savings for relatively modest for your organizations. If you want to see where Michael and I are going, we're doing a listening tour, and so Michael's going to be in Northern California. I'm going to be Charleston, West Virginia, and Cleveland, and Pittsburgh, and Indianapolis, and I'm going to be in Dallas and El Paso, and going to Mexico and Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Almost all these events are free. Almost all of them are open to the public. You can just go in here and register. And if we're not coming to your town and you have a group and you want us to come to your town, you can just hit request and you say, Ray and Michael, we're doing an organization in Madison, Wisconsin. We come when it's not snowing, and we'll see if we can accommodate that too. So all here to do it. And then you can email us right here on the website. And Michael and I are devoting the majority of our proceeds from the book to efforts to prevent and treat the disease.
Nice. And we're very grateful that you accepted our request to talk to us. Okay, our next question comes from Edie. Go ahead, Edie. I unmuted you.
Hang on a second. I can't see. Okay. I can't see. We still have his screen up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to stop my screen.
I'm like, I want to say.
Killing me. I'm killing me, but where'd my little stop share button go? Roger, can you?
Let me see. If I take you off as a co-host, maybe that'll do it.
Yeah.
There we
Thank you.
go.
There
Beautiful.
we go. That's better. Okay. Let me do this. First of all, it's good to see you again, Ray.
Thank you.
I have a question about the diagnostic tools that are used, different scans like the MRI and the PET scan, things like that. With a PET scan, they use an injection called, and I'm not sure I can say it correctly, fluorodeoxyglucose, and
Yes.
it has a radioactive tracer. How does that affect the brain, and is that something people with Parkinson's should avoid or be concerned about?
So I don't know Michael Oken, but he would be the one to answer that question. It's nice when we're together because we have complementary. He knows more about Parkinson than I do, but I wouldn't. I don't think it's so. It's as its name supplies. It's basically glucose labeled with a radioactive atom, so that it can be imaged using a PET scan, which measures radioactivity.
Uh-huh.
Given that in general people are just getting this once, I would think that this would not be a major health concern. Now, I say that knowing that when I was in medical school, we were taught that the contrast agent used for MRIs, gadolinium, was essentially benign, but we figured out later it's not. But I don't think I would lose too much sleep over it, especially since it's a one-time injection.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? You either raise your hand physically or raise your hand digitally, and I'll. Marcia, go ahead. I unmuted you.
Hi, Dr. Dorsey. I wanted to
Hello.
ask you if you've heard anything about, or if you do endorse this or not, the Zetagenesis FGF1 research.
Fibroblast growth factor 1.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
There's a group out in Las Vegas that's doing research now, it's medical research on nasal delivery of the product, the FGF1. They believe that that Parkinson's is caused by a lack of blood flow or diminished blood flow in the brain. And they've been finding by angiogenesis that they're coming back. They've done starting MRIs, and 6 months later, repeat it. It's not approved yet, but they're working on getting it approved for people with type 2 diabetes.
I am unaware of that. I don't think we covered it in the book. But if you email info@pdplan.org, I'll route that one to Michael Oken and let him
Thank you.
give
I
you a
would like
better
to do that.
response.
Okay. Thank
Along
you.
those lines, I was thinking too of recently I saw or read an article about and it was a webinar about gene therapy, the GmbH gene therapy. Have you had a chance to look into that at all?
Yeah, so I think it's one, how do we advance knowledge? And that's through research. And two, to advance knowledge research, we need people to participate in research. But when you are participating in a research study, the goal of that study is to do what?
Try to help people with Parkinson's get better.
No.
No.
The goal of that study is to advance knowledge. The goal of that study is not to make you better. So I think people just listen, I do lots of research. I recruit all of you. Some of you participated in my research studies. The goal of those research studies is to advance knowledge. It is not to make you better. If we knew it was going to make you better, we would just give it to you.
That's true.
So
That's true.
Just be I think sometimes I'm in the latest clinical trial, and that can be fine. But there's a downside to it. Most trials fail. Most investigational therapies do not work. Almost all of them have adverse effects associated with them. So I like to get people just to make sure, listen, we want people to research. On our website, you can sign up to participate in research. So, but I would just give caution is to it, and just be really, really, really diligent and think about where you get that information. Is this someone who's been carrying you for the last 2 or 3 years and you trust? Fantastic. Is this something online from someone that you don't know? So is it someone who's charging you? So just give thought to it. Be smart. Susan Sontag in New York has this great saying: "Be serious, be passionate, and wake up." So I think we need to do that for Parkinson's disease. But just take everything with a grain of salt. Even what we say, take it with a grain of salt, and make considered judgments.
Yeah, because unfortunately there is a lot of snake oil salesmen out there, so to speak. Carl Rubin, you have a question.
Is Mike here?
Go ahead.
Hi. So I'm Carl's spouse, Alice, and we're in Southern California. And thank you so much, Dr. Dorsey, for this. And we have a question. We know that some of the movement disorder specialists in Southern California are very enthusiastic about the idea of Ambroxol to be eventually used for people with the GBA1 mutation who have Parkinson's disease. And my understanding, or our understanding, is that Ambroxol is not yet available in the US, although it's readily available over the counter as a simple cough medicine in Europe. Do you know what's preventing it from being available in the US? And is that something where there should be a campaign by Parkinson's patients, at least ones with GBA mutations, to get it available sooner so that once the clinical trials have ended, it'll be available? And so we won't have to wait too many years if it's something that could really help people. Apparently, some people are using it by having people come into the country and supply it that way from other countries, and then their doctors are thrilled and they say they're doing really well on it. What do you think in terms of that being a campaign that's something that patients can do to raise noise so that it gets approved? And is there some reason it isn't approved in the US?
Pages 181 to 183, Michael writes about Ambroxol, and it may lower the levels of alpha-synuclein. I think I would get excited about it if there were a clinical trial large that demonstrated its benefit. Then that's when I would push. I think there are ongoing clinical trials that Michael talks about on Ambroxol specifically. But to my knowledge, there hasn't been a large study demonstrating efficacy. Now, in the laboratory, it's been studied. But I would like to see those studies done in it. So you have to think, like, even for a drug that's effective, you have to think what's the dose that's effective? How frequently do you need to take it? What's the route of exposure that you're going to take it? For which individuals with Parkinson's disease is it beneficial? If it's for people with GBA mutations, where in the course of the disease? Was it studied in people with early Parkinson's disease? Was it studied with mid-stage Parkinson's disease, late-stage Parkinson's disease, all comers? What were the untoward? If a drug's biologically active, it has to have adverse effects. What are those adverse effects? Does it apply to my individual, my spouse, for example, in this example? So I think we talk about it, and chapters 8 and 9 are about new treatments, and Michael goes through them in many of them in great detail, including Ambroxol. But I think I would save the activism until we have demonstration that it's efficacious, and then let's shorten the time until which this drug can become available.
Because I remember I read a book called The Promise of Lithium. And after I read that, and we actually interviewed the author at one of our meetings, I said, I'm going to try over-the-counter lithium. And I tried it. It didn't do anything for me. So,
yeah. So Tom Gattuso, colleague, we both trained at the University of Rochester.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. And so he's a really smart guy. He showed when he was a young investigator, he found that gabapentin helped reduce hot flashes. So listen, there are things that we're missing, and Michael writes a whole section on repurposing old drugs. And so there are promises out there to do it. But we need to increase the amount of research funding 10x. $250 million is not going to get the job done. $250 million is not going to get the job done. So if you want these things studied, especially for things that are not necessarily patent protected, there aren't financial incentives, then we need to increase funding. This would be like Ambroxol would be a great thing for Michael J. Fox Foundation. I don't want to speak for them, but that's a type great thing to approach them about helping funding and accelerate, because here's something that's likely lacks of commercial entities to push it forward.
Yeah.
And we're coming to, I don't know, where are you, in Orange County or LA? We're in Southern California.
Orange County, Irvine, California.
So I went to high school, Corona Mar High School, and we're coming to Hoag Hospital on January 26th, I think. So,
oh, great.
And I think Michael Oken's there, so you can ask him all about it in Ambroxol on January 26th.
Nice.
Great. Thank you.
Let me make sure we got that right.
Anybody else have a
Yeah.
question for Ray while we're all together? Just looking real quick for hands.
I think Miss Anderson, Edie
Oh,
Anderson.
Edie, do you have another question? Oh, Drew, you got a question. Hold on. Let me unmute Drew. Go ahead, Drew.
Dr. Dorsey. My question for you is, what has happened to glyphosate? I don't see it with the prominence that paraquat has in terms of creating hazardous conditions for the users of that product.
Yeah, so glyphosate is most strongly linked in a medical standpoint to cancer, specifically non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Because of so many lawsuits, it's likely that, this is Wall Street Journal articles, that they might just withdraw the product from the market. Why can't we do the same thing? Why can't there be enough legal pressure on paraquat? If the EPA won't ban it, if you want activism, why aren't we getting rid of paraquat? I mean, it's associated with 150% increased risk of Parkinson's disease among farmers. And a study done in LA, Beata Ritz and Kimberly Paul at UCLA, Beata Ritz, unbelievable, showed that simply living or working near where paraquat is sprayed is associated with a doubling of the risk of Parkinson's. So you talk about externalities, benefits that aren't priced into a product. Simply living or working where paraquat is sprayed. You're not the farmer, you're not the applicator. You just live or work near where paraquat is sprayed and your risk of Parkinson's is doubled, or at least associated with a doubling of the risk. Why aren't we making our voices heard and getting rid of paraquat? Why are we letting it still be sprayed on corn fields, soybean fields, cotton fields, vineyards across the United States today? If we stop spraying paraquat in the United States and around the world, we get rid of the seeds of Parkinson's and we create future generations without it. And hey, by the way, we might slow the rate of progression for people who live near these fields.
Good point. Anybody else?
I do see this note here. Residential pest control companies insist on spraying every 3 months with a year contract requiring 5 treatments. What can I do? Stop the contract. Listen, if you got Parkinson's disease, 60% of your dopamine-producing nerve cells have died off. You want to protect that remaining 40%, and you got to be as vigilant and dedicated about it, as passionate about it. And don't let other people tell you what is safe for you or not safe for you, especially people with financial interests, including me. Figure it out for yourself. We give you information and tell them to stop it.
Yeah, I used to live on a golf course in a condominium in Sarasota, and that's one of the main reasons I moved, because I had no control over what they sprayed and how often they sprayed. And so I moved to a house in Venice where I can control the environment.
These are involuntary exposures. Like your exposure, Roger, was involuntary. You were not told that the risk of TCE was cancer. You were not told that the risk of Parkinson's disease, that you had an increased risk of Parkinson's from working with these chemicals. These are involuntary exposures. And one person said negative externalities. When I see people with Parkinson's, I get pissed. I see robberies, and I want the robberies to end, right? I want the robberies to end. I don't want people to be robbed of their golden years. I don't want people to be robbed of their ability to go to the bathroom. I don't want people to be robbed of their ability to sleep throughout the night. I don't want people to be robbed of their good sunny dispositions. I don't want people's time to be robbed caring for individuals with Parkinson's disease. I want people to live lives, long, healthy, happy lives, free of this disease. And if we stop these robberies, we can realize it.
Well, not to get into politics, because I don't want to get into politics, but being the current administration's stance on things and the way things have been cut, I mean, realistically, what it's going to take to get the funding that we want for Parkinson's.
What a great contrast. What a great contrast. Listen, why aren't we building things? Why aren't we building a world where 1 in 31 kids don't get autism? Why aren't we building a world where 1 in 3 85-year-olds aren't getting Alzheimer's? Why aren't we building a world without Parkinson's? There's a strong sentiment in the public that chemicals in our food, water, and air are contributing to the rise of chronic diseases.
Yeah, PFAS, a good example.
And Parkinson's disease is the poster child of it. This is the poster child for it. And we give you 60 pages of references, 1,000 references, and tons of stories laying out as best as we can in 2023 and 2024, evidence from Drs. Caroline Tanner and Beata Ritz and all these fantastic researchers, why the environmental causes of this disease and how we can create a world without it. We should be focused on building something. It's easy to tear something down. It's easy to tear down a sandcastle, right? And easy to knock it down, a sandcastle. It's harder to build it up. Why don't we create a world without these diseases. And, HIV activist President Reagan, he was lots of things. When he was governor of California in the 1960s, he said we should eliminate all unnecessary driving because of the effects of air pollution. But he was slow to respond to the HIV crisis. But that did not stop, that actually motivated the HIV activists to form an organization called ACT UP, and silence equals death. We've been too silent in the Parkinson's community, and that silence has led to suffering, needless and preventable suffering, and that needs to end.
I agree, totally. All right, anybody else real quick? I don't want to keep you too long there, Ray.
Yeah.
Oh, Edie, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick question, and I don't know, this might sound weird. On page 94 of your book, you have an illustration of environmental toxins being inhaled or ingested.
Yeah.
My question is this: sometimes you can't avoid being exposed to toxins. For instance, when I ride my bike, I'm in a community that has very little traffic, but every now and then a work van or a pickup truck goes by and spits out a tremendous amount of fumes. Is it better to breathe through your mouth so it doesn't go directly to your brain, or does it matter?
Good question.
So I have the same thing. So when I walk the streets of New York and someone's polluting or they're breaking up concrete, I hold my breath. So that's what I do. When air pollution was really bad in Rochester, New York, and some of you remember the Canadian wildfires came down. I think I was at a meeting yesterday. Someone told me 1/3 of particulate matter, little pieces of dirt and soot, are now from wildfires. I wore a mask when I went outside with really bad air quality because I like to ride my bike. So I do that. Listen, sanity needs to rule at some point in time, so you can't go around getting the things. And in general, with Parkinson's, I think, as hopefully we indicate, it appears that it's not a one-time exposure. I could be wrong. It appears it's not like a one-time exposure. It's ongoing exposure for some period of time. The Marines at Camp Lejeune, 2 years on average, but some of them were there for less than a year before they developed the disease. So I wouldn't get concerned about things, but there have been studies on air pollution among individuals with Parkinson's disease. People who live in areas with high levels of air pollution had increased risk for hospitalizations tied to their Parkinson's disease, suggesting that air pollution, even among people already with the disease, increases your risk for progression. So that's why I tell people to be really, really, really vigilant about avoiding ongoing exposure. It can't be helpful if you have Parkinson's to be exposed to paraquat.
No, that makes total sense. Ken, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah. Hi, Dr. Dorsey. Thanks. Riveting interview. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
The comment you made a few minutes ago, maybe you don't remember, about gabapentin. I missed it.
Well, so gabapentin, Tom Gattuso, my colleague who trained at the University of Rochester, when he was a fellow, I think even listened to patients, right? He listened to patients, and he heard that, and perhaps I forgot the specifics, but woman was on gabapentin and reported decreased hot flashes. And so I think gabapentin now has an indication, or subsequent clinical trials have shown gabapentin to be a potential treatment for hot flashes. Now, I'm a neurologist. I'm not here to talk about hot flashes, not my area of expertise. But I think it's just that sometimes you can find existing treatments, whether it's Imbrexol or others, that might be beneficial for treating diseases that you wouldn't have otherwise thought of.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Well, thank you very much, Ray, for coming today. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your book tour and your busy schedule to meet with us, and I wish you all the best on the tour. We look forward so much to your coming in March for the PD Expo from the Neuro Challenge Foundation. I'm definitely looking forward to meeting in person and getting to know you a little bit better. And we wish you and Michael all the best in the tour, and hopefully the plan will come to complete realization in the very, very near future.
Thank you, Roger. So if you haven't joined PD Avengers, join PD Avengers. If you haven't got a copy of the book, read a copy of the book. If you read a copy of the book, leave a review on Amazon. If you want to participate in any of our research studies, you can go to our website. If you want us to come visit you in your communities, you can go to our website. Listen, the more activism we have, the more we make our voices heard, the sooner we get rid of this disease, the sooner we find ways to slow it, the sooner we find ways to treat it, and the sooner we find ways to prevent it. and we can all do this. It's well within our control. 1.2 million Americans make their voices heard, and the course of this disease changes for all people and for all time.
I totally agree. Well, thank you again, Ray. Really appreciate it, you coming.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody. We'll see you all in 2 weeks.